A secret admirer kept leaving me gifts at the perfect moments: an umbrella on rainy days, hot meals after brutal shifts, flowers when I needed them most. For months, I obsessed over finding this mysterious person who seemed to know exactly what I needed and when. I never imagined the truth would be more heartwarming than any romance I could have dreamed of. Before we dive into this mystery, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more incredible stories every day. Now, let's head back to my lonely apartment building. Moving to Chicago at 26 to work as a nurse had seemed like the adventure I needed. Fresh out of nursing school in small-town Iowa, I was ready to make a difference in the big city, to save lives and build the meaningful career I had always dreamed of. What I hadn't anticipated was how isolating that dream would become. My life had shrunk to a predictable, exhausting cycle: 12-hour shifts at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the 20-minute commute home to my studio apartment in a converted brownstone, and maybe 6 hours of sleep before doing it all over again. I worked in the cardiac ICU, where every day was a battle between life and death, where families cried in waiting rooms and miracles felt as rare as they were precious. The apartment building I lived in was filled with people I never saw. We were all ghosts to each other, passing in hallways with polite nods and tired smiles. I knew there was an elderly man who lived across the hall. I'd see him occasionally, a tall, thin figure with silver hair who always wore cardigans and moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to be invisible. He would nod politely when our paths crossed, but we had never exchanged more than a quiet "good morning." My days blended into one another in a haze of medical charts, beeping monitors, and the constant weight of other people's pain. I would come home to my empty apartment, heat up a frozen dinner, and fall asleep on my couch watching Netflix, too tired to even make it to my bed. I had no social life, no dating prospects, no friends outside of work. I was living the life I thought I wanted, but I was drowning in loneliness. It was a Tuesday in October when it started. I had just finished a brutal 16-hour shift. We'd lost 2 patients, saved 1, and I was running on nothing but coffee and determination. Mrs. Patterson, a 73-year-old grandmother, had coded twice during my shift. We'd managed to bring her back both times, but I could see in her family's eyes the same exhaustion I felt in my bones. Her daughter had gripped my hand and whispered, "Thank you for fighting for her." And I had nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. I dragged myself up the 3 flights of stairs to my floor, my scrubs wrinkled, my hair falling out of its ponytail, and my soul feeling as heavy as my feet. The hallway was dimly lit by a single overhead bulb, and the silence was broken only by the distant sound of a television from one of the apartments. That's when I saw it. Sitting outside my apartment door was a small paper bag with my name written on it in careful, old-fashioned handwriting. Taylor Mitchell was written in blue ink, the letters formed with the precision of someone who had learned penmanship in a different era. Inside was a turkey sandwich, still warm, wrapped in wax paper like something from a 1950s diner. There was a small container of homemade soup, chicken noodle, the kind that smelled like comfort and care. And tucked beneath it all was a small note written on cream-colored paper. "Thank you for all you do. The world is better because of people like you. A friend." I looked up and down the empty hallway, wondering who could have left it. The sandwich was perfect, exactly what I would have made for myself if I'd had the energy. The soup was still steaming, which meant whoever had left it knew exactly when I would be coming home. I ate standing in my kitchen, too tired to even sit down, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like someone in this vast, anonymous city actually saw me. The gifts continued, always small, always perfectly timed, always exactly what I needed. A week later, after a particularly devastating shift where we'd lost a young father to a massive heart attack, I found a small bouquet of sunflowers outside my door. They weren't expensive, probably from the grocery store down the street, but they were bright and cheerful, and they came with a note that said, "For bringing light to dark places. Your compassion makes a difference." The flowers weren't just beautiful, they were perfectly chosen. Sunflowers had been my mother's favorite, something that I had never told anyone in Chicago. Somehow, my mysterious benefactor had chosen the exact flowers that would remind me of home, of love, of the reasons I had become a nurse in the first place. 2 weeks after that, during a stretch of October rain that seemed to last forever, I discovered an umbrella leaning against my door. It was a simple black umbrella, nothing fancy, but it appeared on the exact morning I realized I'd left it at the hospital. I had been dreading the walk to work in the downpour, and there it was, like an answer to a prayer I hadn't even said. The note attached said, "Stay dry. The world needs you healthy." Each gift was a small miracle of timing and thoughtfulness. A thermos of hot soup appeared after a night when I'd worked through dinner, my stomach growling audibly during report. A soft throw blanket was delivered during a week when my building's heating was broken and I'd been shivering in my apartment. A small potted plant, a hardy succulent that even I couldn't kill, showed up with a note about bringing life to small spaces. But it wasn't just the gifts themselves that amazed me. It was the knowledge behind them. Whoever was doing this understood the life of a healthcare worker in a way that spoke of personal experience. They knew that after a 12-hour shift, the last thing you wanted to do was cook. They knew that losing a patient left you feeling hollow and questioning everything. They knew that the small comforts, a warm meal, a soft blanket, something beautiful to look at, could make the difference between despair and hope. I became obsessed with solving the mystery. Who was watching me closely enough to know my schedule, my needs, my worst days? Who cared enough about a stranger to perform these small acts of kindness without asking for anything in return? My first suspect was Marcus, the night security guard at the hospital. He was a kind man in his 50s who always asked how my shift had gone and sometimes shared stories about his own daughter who was studying to be a nurse. He would have known my schedule, and he had the gentle nature of someone who might perform anonymous acts of kindness. "Marcus," I said one night as I was leaving the hospital, "have you ever heard of anyone leaving gifts for nurses? Like anonymous gifts?" He looked genuinely puzzled. "What kind of gifts?" I described some of the items I'd received, and his confusion seemed authentic. "That's really sweet, Taylor, but I've never heard of anything like that. You think someone's got a crush on you?" The romantic angle had occurred to me, but something about the gifts felt different. They weren't trying to impress or seduce. They felt more like the care a parent might show a child or a friend might show a friend who was going through a difficult time. Then I wondered about Dr. Peterson, the attending physician who supervised our unit. He was single, around my age, and had always been particularly encouraging during difficult cases. He had a way of appearing at exactly the right moment with exactly the right words, and he seemed to understand the emotional toll of our work. "Dr. Peterson," I said during a quiet moment in the break room, "do you know anything about someone leaving gifts for staff members?" He raised an eyebrow. "What kind of gifts?" When I explained, he smiled. "Sounds like you have a guardian angel. That's really wonderful, Taylor. I wish I could take credit for it, but it's not me. Though I think it's beautiful that someone recognizes how hard you work." I even suspected my downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who I occasionally ran into at the mailboxes. She was a retired teacher who always smiled warmly and sometimes commented on how hard I worked. She had the observant nature of someone who might notice patterns and needs. "Mrs. Chen," I said one afternoon when we met in the lobby, "have you noticed anyone leaving packages outside my door?" She looked intrigued. "No, but I'd love to know who your secret admirer is. How romantic." But when I described the gifts, her expression changed. Oh, honey, that doesn't sound romantic. That sounds like someone who really cares about your well-being, like a parent or a grandparent might do. The mystery deepened when I tried to catch my benefactor in the act. I started varying my schedule, coming home at different times, even hiding in the stairwell for an hour after particularly long shifts. But somehow, my mysterious friend always seemed to know exactly when I would be gone and when I would return. The gifts appeared like magic, always when I was at work, always perfectly timed for my return. I asked the building superintendent, Mr. Rodriguez, if he had seen anyone leaving packages outside my door. He shook his head, but promised to keep an eye out. Whoever it is, they're being very careful. I've never seen anyone suspicious in the building. I even considered installing a small camera, but something about that felt like a violation of the trust my anonymous friend had placed in me. These gifts were given in a spirit of pure generosity, and surveilling my benefactor felt wrong. The gifts weren't expensive. I could tell that whoever was leaving them was working within a modest budget. But they were thoughtful in a way that spoke of someone who understood the life of a healthcare worker, someone who knew the weight of caring for others, the exhaustion that came from giving everything you had to people who were suffering. It was in November, during a particularly brutal week, when we'd had 3 deaths in 2 days, that the most meaningful gift appeared. I came home to find a small, leather-bound journal outside my door. The note attached was longer than usual. For your thoughts, your worries, your hopes. Sometimes writing them down makes them easier to carry. You are making a difference, even when it doesn't feel like it. Every life you touch is better because of your care. I sat on my couch that night, holding the journal, and for the first time since moving to Chicago, I cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming feeling of being seen, of being cared for by someone who understood exactly what I needed to hear. The week had been devastating. We'd lost Mr. Garcia, a 45-year-old construction worker with 3 young children, Mrs. Williams, a grandmother who'd been planning her granddaughter's wedding, and Tommy, a 19-year-old college student who'd had an undiagnosed heart condition. Each loss had felt personal, had made me question whether I was strong enough for this job, whether I was making any difference at all, and somehow my mysterious friend had known exactly what I needed: permission to feel, a place to put my thoughts, and a reminder that my work mattered. That's when I decided I had to find out who was doing this. Not to stop them, but to thank them properly, to let them know how much their kindness meant to me. I started paying closer attention to the patterns, to the timing, to any clues I might have missed. The breakthrough came on a snowy December evening. I had just finished a double shift, 18 hours straight, because we were short-staffed and the emergency department was overflowing. It had been one of those days when everything went wrong. Equipment failures, difficult families, and a young mother who'd had a heart attack while Christmas shopping. I was climbing the stairs to my apartment, each step feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds, when I heard a door close softly, somewhere above me. It was unusual. Most of my neighbors were either at work or asleep by the time I got home. The sound was careful, deliberate, like someone trying to not be heard. I quickened my pace, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever might be in the hallway. My heart was pounding, not from exhaustion, but from the possibility that I might finally solve the mystery that had been consuming my thoughts for months. When I reached my floor, it was empty, but I noticed something I had never paid attention to before. The apartment directly across from mine, the one where the quiet, elderly man lived, had a small gap under the door, and I could see a thin line of light underneath. More importantly, I could smell something that made my heart skip: the faint aroma of turkey and fresh bread, the same smell that had been on that very first sandwich. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, staring at that door, pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. The timing of the gifts, the understanding of a healthcare worker's life, the careful handwriting that spoke of another generation, and the knowledge of exactly what a tired nurse needed after a difficult shift. My mysterious benefactor wasn't a romantic admirer or a colleague from work. He was my neighbor, the man I passed in the hallway with polite nods, the person I had never really seen because I was always too tired, too focused on my own struggles, to notice the quiet kindness that lived just across the hall. The next morning, I made a decision that would change both of our lives. Instead of going straight to work, I stopped at the bakery down the street and bought 2 cups of coffee and a box of pastries. Then I walked across the hall and knocked on his door, my heart pounding with nervousness and anticipation. The man who answered was exactly who I expected, and yet completely different from what I had imagined. He was tall and thin, probably in his late 70s, with kind blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and silver hair that was neatly combed. He was wearing a cardigan sweater over a white shirt, and when he saw me standing there with coffee and pastries, his face went through a series of emotions: surprise, recognition, and then something that looked almost like embarrassment. "Mr. I began, realizing I didn't even know his name. "Harold," he said quietly, his voice carrying the slight tremor of age, but also a warmth that I recognized from somewhere I couldn't quite place. "Harold Whitman." "Harold," I repeated, testing the name. "I'm Taylor. I live across the hall." "I know who you are," he said. And then, after a pause that seemed to carry the weight of months of secret kindness, "I suppose you figured it out." I held up the coffee and pastries, my hands trembling slightly. "Would you like to talk about it?" He hesitated for a moment, and I could see him weighing his options, probably wondering if he was in trouble, if I was angry, if his secret acts of kindness had somehow crossed a line. Then he stepped aside to let me in, and I entered a world that would become as familiar and comforting as my own. His apartment was the mirror image of mine, but felt completely different. Where mine was sparse and functional, furnished with the bare necessities of someone who spent most of her time at work, his was filled with the accumulated warmth of a long life well lived. There were bookshelves lined with well-worn volumes, comfortable furniture that had been chosen for comfort rather than style, and everywhere, photographs of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The woman appeared to be about my age in some photos, older in others, always with the same warm expression that seemed to light up every picture. She was wearing a nurse's uniform in several photos, and I could see the same exhaustion in her eyes that I saw in my own mirror every morning. "That's Margaret," Harold said, noticing me looking at the photos. "My wife. She passed away 2 years ago." We sat at his small kitchen table, and I poured the coffee while he arranged the pastries on a plate with the careful attention of someone who had learned to make small rituals meaningful. His hands shook slightly as he worked, and I noticed that he moved with the deliberate care of someone who lived alone and had learned to take his time with everything. "She was a nurse," he said, quietly, his voice filled with a pride that had survived grief. "Worked at Presbyterian for 37 years. Cardiac unit, just like you." The pieces fell into place with a clarity that took my breath away. "You've been watching me," I said, not accusingly, but with understanding. Harold nodded, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup as if drawing warmth from it. "Not watching, exactly, but noticing. You keep the same schedule Margaret used to keep. You come home with the same exhaustion she used to carry. You have the same look in your eyes that she had after the difficult days, like you're carrying the weight of the world and wondering if you're strong enough. So you decided to take care of me," I said. "I decided to honor her," he corrected gently. "Margaret used to say that nurses were the unsung heroes of the world, that they gave everything they had to strangers and rarely got anything back. She used to come home from her shifts and tell me about the young nurses, how hard they worked, how much they cared, how little support they had. He stood up and walked to a bookshelf, returning with a small photo of a woman in scrubs, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, her face tired but smiling. She looked remarkably like me, not in features, but in that particular exhaustion that comes from caring too much, from giving everything you have to people who are suffering. When I saw you moving in, saw you leaving for work in your scrubs, coming home at all hours looking exactly like Margaret used to look, I don't know. It felt like a sign, like maybe I could do for you what I wished someone had done for her when she was young. I felt tears stinging my eyes. Harold, you don't even know me. I know enough, he said firmly, his voice gaining strength. I know you work double shifts when they're short-staffed. I know you cry in the stairwell sometimes after the bad days. I know you eat cereal for dinner more often than you should because you're too tired to cook. I know you're a good person, doing important work in a world that doesn't appreciate you enough. How do you know all that? He smiled, the first real smile I had seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. Thin walls and an old man who doesn't sleep much anymore. Plus, Margaret taught me to recognize the signs. The way you hold your shoulders after a loss, the way you move when you're running on empty, the way you pause outside your door before going in, like you're gathering strength for whatever comes next. He walked to a small desk in the corner and returned with a notebook, its pages filled with his careful handwriting. He said, I started keeping track, not in a creepy way, but the way Margaret used to keep track of her young nurses. She said it helped her remember who needed extra encouragement, who was having a hard time, who might benefit from a kind word or a small gesture. I looked at the pages filled with observations about my schedule, my moods, my needs. November 15th, worked 18 hours, looked exhausted, left soup. November 22nd, heard crying in hallway after shift, left flowers and encouraging note. December 3rd, hasn't been grocery shopping in a week, probably living on hospital cafeteria food, left homemade meal. It wasn't invasive or stalking. It was the methodical care of someone who had learned to pay attention, to notice when someone was struggling. It was love in action, documented with the precision of someone who understood that caring for others required intention and effort. Margaret kept a similar notebook about the young nurses on her unit. She said the experienced nurses often forgot what it was like to be new, to be overwhelmed, to feel like you were drowning in responsibility. She made it her mission to look out for them. I realized then that Harold hadn't just been honoring his wife's memory by taking care of me. He had been continuing her work, extending her legacy of compassion to a new generation of nurses. I hope I didn't overstep, he said, closing the notebook. I know it might seem strange, an old man leaving gifts for a young woman he doesn't know, but it wasn't anything inappropriate. It was just, I missed taking care of someone. I missed being useful. Harold, I said, reaching across the table to touch his weathered hand. It was the most beautiful thing anyone has ever done for me. You have no idea how much those gifts meant, how much they helped me get through some of the hardest days of my life. His eyes filled with tears. Margaret would have liked you, he said. She would have said you have the heart of a true nurse. She could always tell the ones who were in it for the right reasons. I would have liked to meet her, I said, looking around at the photos that filled his apartment like a shrine to their life together. You would have, he agreed. She had a way of making everyone feel seen, feel valued. She used to bring home stories about the young nurses who reminded her of herself when she was starting out. She'd worry about them, wonder if they were eating enough, sleeping enough, taking care of themselves while they took care of everyone else. That conversation was the beginning of the most unexpected and precious friendship of my life. Harold and I began having coffee together on my days off, and he would tell me stories about Margaret, about their life together, about the lessons she had taught him about caring for others. Their love story was the kind you read about in books.
They had met when Harold was a young accountant and Margaret was a nursing student. He had been in the hospital after a car accident, and she had been assigned to his care. "She was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen," he told me. But it wasn't just her looks, it was the way she cared for people, the way she made everyone feel like they mattered. They had been married for 52 years when Margaret died of cancer. Harold had cared for her at home during her final months, learning to give medications, manage her pain, provide the kind of intimate care that Margaret had given to thousands of patients over her career. She taught me that caring for someone isn't just about the big gestures. It's about noticing the small things, anticipating needs, being present in the moments that matter. In return, I brought youth and energy into his quiet apartment. I helped him set up a computer so he could video chat with his grandchildren who lived across the country. I introduced him to streaming services so he could watch the old movies he loved. I brought him stories from the hospital, the victories and defeats that made up my days. More importantly, we took care of each other. Harold continued to leave small gifts, not as a mysterious benefactor anymore, but as a friend who understood my life. He would make extra soup when he was cooking and bring me a bowl. He would pick up groceries for me when I was working long stretches. He would water my plants when I was too busy to remember. And I took care of him, too. I checked on him when he had a cold, helped him organize his medications, and made sure he wasn't spending too much time alone with his memories. I brought him to the hospital's family events, where he charmed my colleagues with stories about Margaret and her nursing career.
The other nurses on my unit adopted Harold as an honorary grandfather. He would sometimes come to our holiday parties, always bringing homemade cookies and stories about the old days of nursing. He became a bridge between the past and present of our profession, a reminder that the work we were doing was part of a long tradition of caring. "You know," my colleague Sarah said after meeting Harold at our Christmas party, "he talks about you the way my grandfather talks about me and my cousin, like you're the most precious thing in the world." It was true. Harold had become the family I never knew I needed. He worried about me the way a grandfather worries about a granddaughter, celebrated my successes, comforted me during my failures, and provided the kind of unconditional support that I had been missing since moving away from home. 6 months after our first coffee together, Harold showed me something that made me understand the full depth of what he had been doing. He pulled out a box from his closet, filled with letters and cards from nurses who had worked with Margaret over the years. "She touched so many lives," he said, reading from a card written by a nurse who had worked with Margaret 30 years earlier. This woman wrote to tell Margaret that she had saved her career, that Margaret's kindness and mentorship had kept her from quitting during her first year. There were dozens of similar letters, all from nurses who credited Margaret with helping them through difficult times, teaching them important lessons, or simply being there when they needed support. I realized after she died that her legacy wasn't just in the patients she saved, Harold said. It was in the nurses she nurtured, the young women she helped become the caregivers they were meant to be. And I thought, maybe I could continue that legacy in my own small way. On the anniversary of Margaret's death, Harold and I visited her grave together. He brought flowers, the same sunflowers he had left outside my door that first time, and I brought a letter I had written to her, thanking her for raising a man who knew how to see when someone needed care, who understood that small acts of kindness could save a person's life in ways that had nothing to do with medicine. "She would have been so proud," Harold said as we stood by her headstone. "She always said that the best way to honor a nurse was to take care of another nurse." As we walked back to our building that day, I realized that my mysterious admirer had given me something far more valuable than any romantic relationship could have provided. He had given me a reminder that kindness exists in the world, that people notice when you're struggling, that sometimes the most profound love comes from the most unexpected places. I had moved to Chicago looking for adventure and purpose in my career,
What I had found instead was something I hadn't even known I was missing, a reminder that we're all connected, that taking care of each other is what makes us human, and that sometimes the most beautiful relationships are the ones that begin with a simple act of anonymous kindness.
Harold still leaves me gifts, but now they come with his name attached, and usually with an invitation to share them. And I've started leaving gifts for him too. Books I think he'll enjoy, photos from my travels, small tokens that say, I see you, I value you, I'm grateful for you. Our friendship has taught me that family isn't just about blood relations or romantic partnerships. Sometimes family is an elderly widower who sees your exhaustion and decides to ease it, one small gift at a time. Sometimes family is the person who notices when you're struggling and quietly, without fanfare or expectation of gratitude, makes your life a little bit easier. The mystery of my secret admirer had been solved, but the gift of Harold's friendship continues every day. He has taught me that the most powerful force in the world isn't medicine or technology or wealth. It's the simple human impulse to care for one another, to notice when someone is struggling, and to respond with kindness. And in caring for me, Harold found his own healing. He discovered that grief doesn't have to be the end of love, that honoring someone's memory can be an active, ongoing practice, and that sometimes the best way to heal from loss is to love someone new. We are an unlikely pair, a 78-year-old widower and a 26-year-old nurse, but we have created something beautiful together, a friendship built on mutual care, shared understanding, and the recognition that we all need someone to notice when we're struggling and respond with kindness. The gifts still appear outside my door, but now I know where they come from, and more importantly, I know why. They come from love. Not romantic love, but something deeper and more enduring. They come from the understanding that we are all connected, that caring for others is what gives life meaning, and that sometimes the most profound relationships begin with the simple recognition that someone needs help and the decision to provide it. What an absolutely beautiful story about unexpected friendship and the power of anonymous kindness. Harold's way of honoring his late wife by caring for Taylor shows us that love never truly dies. It just finds new ways to express itself. What do you think about Harold's method of caring for Taylor? Have you ever experienced or given anonymous acts of kindness? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were touched by this heartwarming story of intergenerational friendship and compassion, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more incredible stories every day. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.